Hey everyone, it's Sherilyn Holloway, leader of Ann Campaign's Whole Life Project. I just wanted to hop in really quick before this video and let you know a little bit about it. We actually recorded this video in February of this year with our dear friend Christina Bennett. Christina is a live action correspondent, but she's also a speaker. She's got decades in the pro-life movement, and she is speaking on a topic that was very near and dear to her heart and that she felt that she really wanted to share some insights into. We didn't post this video back then solely because yours truly could not figure out how to get it off my computer. So I have figured that out, and we still wanted to share it with you all because we felt like it was really prevalent to not just that time, but also in upcoming situations that we could see in this country. So we also want to invite you all to become Whole Life Ambassadors. We will be doing a training in August. We will link to that event right below. You can become a Whole Life Ambassador with the Whole Life Project. You receive ongoing monthly training and conversations. We can answer your questions. We help you figure out how to have really tough conversations around the topic of whole life, women and children, and the importance of caring for both. So sit back. We hope that you enjoy this video, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Whole Life Podcast. I'm Sherilyn Holloway, and
I'm Candace Conaway.
We'll do it again, Candace.
Okay.
Because you were right and I was wrong. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Whole Life Podcast. I'm Sherilyn Holloway.
And I'm Candace Conaway.
And we are here to talk about all things whole life from womb to tomb, where we care about mother and child. Today, we're really excited because, as you can see, we are joined by a really good friend, not just of the Whole Life Project, but a really good friend of mine, just a very genuine soul. And you guys are going to love her as much as we do. Christina Bennett dedicated her life to ending abortion upon learning that she herself was saved by a miraculous encounter just moments before her mother's scheduled termination. She is a writer whose work has been featured in Live Action News, Live News, Charisma, and Life Site News, among other publications. Her story is featured in the films Pro-Life Feminist, Still on That Journey, and Hear from Heaven. Christina has had an honor of testifying for the pro-life cause in 2 congressional hearings. She has served 4 years as client service manager at a Connecticut pregnancy center and currently works as the media correspondent for Live Action. Christina is a devoted wife, mother, and a licensed Christian minister. Welcome, Christina.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, ladies. Thank you.
Did I miss anything, Christina, that you want the people to hear about you?
No, I'm in Connecticut. I don't know if it says that in my bio, but
it doesn't.
New England. Exactly. I'm a New England girl. New England representative.
Which we learned that where you live, and I don't know if this Connecticut in general, doesn't have a whole lot of food choices.
Why do you think that? That's not true. Who told you that?
You said that there's a lot of pizza places.
Oh, yeah. Well, there are a lot of pizza places. So my particular city, town, which I won't name, but I never like people to know exactly where I'm at. But my particular city or town has so many more than most places. We've got Thai, we've got Jamaican, we've got Ethiopian, we've got Italian, we've got all sorts of different things. But what we're kind of known for is we're known for a lot of pizza. Mostly in New Haven, which is where Yale's at, and which is actually where I went to school, not at Yale, but at another school, a smaller school called Southern Connecticut State. And that's kind of where we're known for our pizza.
Okay.
Maybe it was just that there wasn't a lot of, or there weren't any like Southern restaurants.
Oh, well, yeah, no.
Maybe
there's a few.
Maybe that was it. I heard when you said no Southern restaurants, I heard no good food.
Understandable. That is understandable. I traveled once to speak at a pregnancy center banquet, and I think it was Mississippi, but I could be wrong. I've never seen this before. They had a soul food buffet. So here we just have, we have Chinese buffets, but they had a soul food buffet. And so I literally went back to that state twice just to make sure I could go get that buffet.
Wow.
Like, how close are you to the buffet?
It was amazing. fried chicken, macaroni and cheese, candied yams, collard greens, and a buffet. As much as I mean, it's like Thanksgiving. It was
Wow.
unbelievable. So we don't have anything really like that here. We have a few soul food places, but it's not, not like the South.
I get it.
We don't do like sausage either with like on top of like people in the South, they do sausage gravy on top of biscuits,
Yeah.
and they do a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
grits and like shrimp and grits and stuff. We don't really
Mhm.
do that as much as other
Interesting.
people do.
That's
Yeah.
fascinating. I mean, I'm in
Wow.
Ohio. We don't do, you can get shrimp and grits, but it's not everywhere. But sausage, biscuits, and gravy is everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to go to a specific like soul food place to get that. Like you're not going to just get it at regular restaurants as part of like the breakfast options. Nope.
That is really fascinating.
Yeah.
But there's good things in Connecticut like you. So
Yes.
we'll still come.
Yes.
We'll still come.
Thank
Yes.
you.
So we wanted to we had some thoughts about what we wanted to talk to Christina about, but since we scheduled this interview, something has come up and we addressed it in a short reel at the Whole Life Project. But it's something that has really been on Christina's heart, and we really wanted to hear from her perspective on what is happening in Ohio, what has happened, and has happened since then. And so I will, if you don't know the Brittany Watts story, I'm going to bring you up to speed a little bit by telling the end first, and then we'll let Christina talk as much as she wants about this issue from her perspective. And so yeah, well, I'll start with this. And this is from CNN. An Ohio woman who suffered a miscarriage and left the non-viable fetus at home will not be criminally charged. A grand jury decided Thursday, dismissing a case that highlighted the extent to which women can be prosecuted when their pregnancy ends, whether by abortion or miscarriage. Now, I think Christina has a very unique perspective on this because of just the different spaces she's been in. And I think that you guys are really going to appreciate hearing from her. So kind of listen in. If you have any questions for Christina, go ahead and just type them up, put them in the comment section, and we will get them to them and get them answered. But Christina, this Ohio woman, Brittany Watts, 34, was charged last year with a felony abuse of a corpse.
It's a painful case, and I actually feel the ache of pain for her when I look at her face, when I saw her on trial, when I've read the many articles that I've read about this story. And I think it's kind of a perfect example, as tragic as it is, as why we really need a whole life perspective. Because automatically when you hear the story, you know that there's the woman, Brittany, and you know that there's the baby that has passed away. And I think depending on, who you are and what you prioritize and how you've heard the story, from what media channel that you've heard it, from, you can have two vastly different perspectives. And so I think that there are some people who, in the pro-life community, when they heard the story, the first thing that they heard was a fetus has been abused, the corpse of a fetus has been abused. And maybe there was even some confusion about, was the baby, fully dead when the baby passed, or maybe some misunderstanding. And this baby was, plunged in the toilet. And that's something that's very jarring. And if, you're a pro-life person, maybe you heard that and you're like, what happened here? And for people that are not even just pro-choice people, but people that are very, much aware of living in a post-Roe world and questioning what that can look like in regards to miscarriages and things like that. For some of them, when they heard that story, it was just shocking because they thought, this is our worst nightmare come to pass. This is what we've said was going to happen. And now we're watching it happen, where a woman is possibly facing jail time for having a miscarriage. Now, technically, really, it's considered to be a stillbirth because of it being 22 weeks. But for the purpose of discussing it, people call it a miscarriage. and that's what people most understand it as. And I think that there were a lot of things that happened with this particular case that just unfortunately went wrong, and it created this really tragic situation. So a couple things I just want to say just to start with. Brittany is not a criminal. And she she's not a criminal. She was a woman who had a pregnancy. According to articles, she didn't share it with her mom and some of her family, so I'm not sure of all the reasons why, but there was some, secrecy around the pregnancy. She worked as a medical receptionist in a different hospital, and this was, from all that I can tell, a wanted pregnancy. And she was going to a hospital. She was going to a Catholic hospital in Ohio to receive treatment. Now, where things got really complicated is that when she was told by the medical professionals that the fetus was going to pass away, there was talk about having her, to be induced. And I'm not exactly sure why, because I'm not privy to that information, but there was an 8-hour meeting at the hospital about this. Now, some people say that they were trying to figure out if they could offer her this, in regards to abortion laws. And I'm not really sure. I don't know. But all I know is that there was an 8-hour meeting. And Brittany was advised to stay in the hospital. And reports say that she left against the advice of the medical professionals. But even that is understandable, because I know for me, I've been in emergency rooms and waiting rooms, and especially if you're having a miscarriage, there's a pain and emotions and everything else. So it's understandable that she left, even though it wasn't, advised for her to do so, especially after waiting 8 hours. And she did come back. But eventually what ended up happening, she had multiple visits that week to the hospital, at least 2 visits. But then when she did pass the baby in the toilet, which is very common, a lot of women experience this. When she did pass the baby in the toilet, she actually tried to get it out, and she put it like in a little pail bucket, and she put it outside. And then another thing that makes it kind of complicated for people, and I think left room for misunderstanding, is that then she went to the hairdresser to get her hair done. Now, I have a very empathetic take on this. And I definitely don't want to discount my own personal experience and how that can play into the way I see things, because I have suffered a miscarriage, and I did things differently, and I can get into that later, if we discuss that. But I did, unfortunately, even having to go through it, I did bring the fetus into the hospital, which is the best thing to do if you can do that, just for your own sake, so you can be checked out, and also for genetic testings and other things. But anyway, I know what it's like to be in that position. And so for her to go to the hairdresser, in my mind, I just think that she was probably just trying to cope with what happened and let me keep up my routine. And I just suffered this really traumatic thing, but I'm going to go and continue on with my day and try to make the best out of it. That's my guess. No one really knows, but that's what I think happened. I don't think it was this cruel thing of, like it was reported when she was on trial. She just went about her day. That was the accusation against her. She just went about her day. But I really don't think that was the case. Now, when she got to the hairdresser noticed that she looked awful and she looked very sick, and told her, I think she called her mom and told her, you have to go to the hospital. And so she did go to the hospital. Now, again, this is where things get very even more complicated. She goes to the hospital, and she's being reassured by a nurse that everything is going to be okay. It's going to be okay. You had this miscarriage, stillbirth. But then that same nurse called the police and told the police that there was a woman who, and the actual transcript you can read online from what she said to the police. But there's a woman who delivered a baby, and it looks like the baby's in the backyard. I don't know where the baby is. You need to come over and do something about it. I'm paraphrasing, but the way that she described it, for me reading it, it didn't have the specific medical language. that you would understand that she's talking about a 22-week-old fetus. If I was just reading it, it sounds like she just delivered a full-term baby and put the baby in the backyard. And I think that's where this case differs from other cases that you hear about where women do deliver babies and they leave them in a garbage pan or a garbage pail, or they leave them in a construction site or somewhere, and then they're found. And that's why we have safe haven laws, so that that doesn't happen. But this is a different situation. So anyway, kind of in closing, she did not even know that the police were called. So she ended up, going home. And I think it was like over a week later that, that an officer, I believe, showed up at her door. And as reports say, her toilet was taken apart and everything else. And it was very traumatic for her. And then she had to face trial. And she was facing up to a year in prison. So it was pretty intense, like the consequences that she was facing. And so I think that this whole thing could have been avoided. Obviously, there's things that Brittany could have done. Obviously, she could have stayed at the hospital and not left and followed that advice, to a T. Obviously, she could have called 911 or gone straight to the hospital after the miscarriage. I think that's basically about it for what she could have done. I think other than that, she did everything everything well. I mean, she was at the hospital. Aside from just leaving when she was advised not to, and not going in or not calling right after the miscarriage. Everything else, I think she was doing her best as a woman who's losing a pregnancy. As for the hospital, what did they do well? I mean, obviously they brought her in and they, treated her, but I think the everything falls apart is, why was she not offered, better medical care when it comes to, offering her to have the pregnancy induced? And I don't have the answer for that, but I will say one thing that's important for people to understand is that if you have a pregnancy where the fetus has passed away and that pregnancy is removed, that is not an abortion. That's not an abortion. And so the more people who understand that, the clearer that is, the better, because I'm not sure if the hospital was wrestling with that, related to abortion laws, but it's not an abortion. Even for me, when I had a miscarriage, they offer you that. Now, I didn't do that. My baby was smaller and measuring even smaller than the gestational age. And so I let the baby pass naturally. But of course, after a certain point, that becomes less and less of a possibility for you to do that. And so if the fetus has to be removed, it is a similar process, of course, to a D&C, but it's not an abortion, because an abortion is the intentional killing of a living child that has a heartbeat, that's already growing, that's alive, and then you come in and you end that life. And this is a different situation. And so one doctor did comment that he was worried that if she didn't have the pregnancy induced, that she could die. And thankfully, she did not die, but she did suffer public shame and humiliation, and is very traumatic. And I think it could have been avoided. So that's my take on it. I just think that it could have been avoided. And I also want to say that I think it's very sad that now that this case even has been dismissed, but through the whole process, the people that you see standing with her are pro-abortion advocates. And they are the ones that have been raising money for her. And they are the ones that have been standing with her literally as she speaks. And I am not judging their motive. Obviously, this is a very frightening case. And so I could see why they would want to stand with her. But at the same time, this is also a case that is now being used to promote a pro-abortion agenda, because they're using it to scare people and say, this is what's going to happen to you in post-Roe world. Women are going to be prosecuted for miscarriages. And so with them standing with her, that really, her story is being used to strengthen those lives. And so that's really tragic. I feel like it perhaps is a missed opportunity for the pro-life movement to really to understand this case and then to show empathy, so she knows, pro-abortion advocates are not the only one who cares. None of us want this to happen to a woman who's dealing with a miscarriage or a stillbirth. So those are my thoughts.
So I am going, so I am in Ohio, and thank you, Christina,
You're
for
welcome.
that. And so there are a couple things that she is now speaking. Once the case was dropped, she is now speaking out publicly. She's been on 60 Minutes. She's been interviewed by every local news channel with her attorney present. And so one clarification, she, two clarifications. She This is the first time I heard about the bucket or wherever she put the baby outside, because she says that she miscarried in the toilet and didn't see anything.
Oh, weird.
And that is when she flushed it. Um, Second thing is that the police showed up at the hospital while she was still there. The police and the detective showed up at the hospital while she was still there. And while she was in the hospital, they were also at her house, going through her backyard. Essentially, whatever the story is about a baby being outside. And so like her mom was calling her, like, the police are here.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Yeah.
she was with
That
the police.
information that I shared is from, well, a few different articles, but mainly the Washington Post, which they said that they've done 600 hours of research on the transcripts and that that's what they shared. But I think that's probably part of the problem with this case is that like there's certain things that just are not clear. And that's
Yeah.
definitely those are big things.
So the flip side of this, in the state of Ohio on December 7th, abortion became legal, like it became a constitutional right um, for the entire state. Now, whether there's going to be term limits or those types of things are to be determined, but as of right now, women have the constitutional right in the state of Ohio to an abortion. So this happened before that arrest.
Right.
So I'm going to give my very strategic way of thinking analysis on what I think is happening here and why we are seeing such staunch side resistance to each side. Like why we have not seen the pro-life movement as a whole kind of reach over and grab her by the hand.
Right.
Warren County, Ohio, where Warren is overwhelmingly conservative.
Hmm.
It is essentially a red county. If it was me and a law was, something that I didn't want to happen was now enshrined in the Constitution, what is something that we could do strategically to keep women from taking the abortion pill and essentially passing their unborn child in their bathroom, which is typically what happens? We could devise a plan and figure out who can we charge in order to be able to make this an issue where women would be afraid to do this. Because the hospital should have had records of how far along she was.
Right.
And so I think I would determine that an 8-hour meeting was not about whether or not they could legally do this, because they could. In the state of Ohio, this is not a question. In the state of Ohio, it is legal up until 21 weeks. And so because she was 22 weeks, maybe that was the concern, but this has not been a concern before. Like, we have not had cases like this before.
Right. Right.
Someone was miscarrying and they didn't know what to do, even during the very, very short time that we had, like the 6-week ban, a very, very short time. This was never an issue. I would argue that there was already something in place that said we need to figure out, and what better place than a Catholic hospital to use somebody as an example of what will happen during late term abortions, right? Whether it be by pill, whatever. I think it was a scare tactic.
So you think it was like sinister on the
Yes.
hospitals and
Hospital, police, public officials, and probably even deeper. Probably, like, I don't want to say like Ohio Right to Life deeper, but even
right.
deeper,
Right.
that there is this plan in more conservative areas that we need to find a case. We need to find a case. It's the same thing that continues to happen with pro-abortion. We need to find the case that makes our argument as to why we need abortion to be enshrined in the Constitution. Oh, there's an 11-year-old girl who was raped and she got pregnant. She had to go to a different state. Perfect case. And so immediately when I heard this, that's the first thing I thought of.
Well, I'll say this, like, I don't know. I can't speak to that. And I hadn't thought that, I still am giving them the benefit of the doubt and thinking they were trying to figure it out. And that's basically what I still think. But that being said, I think that it should be investigated. I think it should be investigated as to how this happened. Like, I think that the hospital should be investigated because 8 hours is a long time. And for a woman leaving and then for her to go on trial, like, there's just answers that we don't have and it's not going to go away. And this is a symbolic case now. And there could be cases like this to follow. So I think those questions do need to be answered. What was happening in the 8-hour meeting? And then you can get to the bottom of that and know, like, what was going on, because the public, we've heard a lot about what she supposedly did, but why was she ever put in that position?
Yeah. And I know
Yeah,
that
we need
like
answers.
the like before, so it's also like really fuzzy, like before she actually miscarried, that she had gone to the hospital, they sent her home, and then she like went
Right.
back,
Then she
and then
came
she
back.
called,
Right.
and and so I don't necessarily know if it's gross. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's gross neglect on the hospital or even the police department, because if the transcripts are showing like this vague phone call, like, oh, there's a baby outside
Right. Right.
or whatever. Um, but again, I'm also a huge conspiracy theorist. And so my brain works in very different ways. But this case, I believe, had they had enough evidence, right? Had the baby been further along, had they had enough, I think that the grand jury would have allowed it. But
Allowed what, her to go to jail?
well, just allowed the case to be heard. Like, basically, they just dropped the
Oh
case.
yeah.
It's not going to happen. Like, she was
Right.
arraigned, but then that was it. Like, nothing else happened. And so there was no like full blown out trial, because that takes years. And they were like, we don't have enough. You don't have enough evidence, basically, to charge her with what you're trying to charge her with. And
The whole
so,
thing is maddening.
because that's what happened. So you're initially arraigned, which, this is what you're being arraigned on. How do you plead? We plead this. Then the state has to gather enough evidence and hand it to the grand jury and say, do we have enough evidence to try her with this? And then the grand jury comes back and says yes or no. And that's then how case. So it only had got to that point and where they turned around and said, you don't have enough evidence for this case. And so it's an ongoing war. And I don't know a lot about politics, and this is like, I'm very new in this space, and I'm learning about how these things happen, and how even when there's constitutional amendments, and then what happens, and how many appeals and things and cycles it has to go to, and it just keeps going back, like it's like a big circle. And I think that from a point of view, where if we're looking at, because I hate to say pro-life individuals, because they're not all the same. I don't want to say conservatives. I don't want to put anybody in a box. But if we're looking at specific individuals on both sides of the fence that are literally willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to win, we're going to see more of this.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately people take sound bites and that's what they hear, and then they have an opinion about that, and they're not always willing to do the research and to dig a little bit deeper to even understand the other side, to somehow kind of find a middle ground. So one person hears she plunged her baby down the toilet, and then the other person hears she's on trial going to jail for a miscarriage. And that's all they need to hear. Like, all one person needs to hear is she plunged her baby down the toilet. I've got a total opinion about that, a complete judgment. I know exactly what happened. And it makes sense that you were brought to trial. And then somebody else hears, she had a miscarriage. And oh, of course, she had a miscarriage in a post-Roe world. And this is what's happening. And they're prosecuting. It's like you just hear part of the sentence, and then your brain, fills in the rest based on what you believe and what you know to be true and what you think is true. But then when you actually dig deep into the story, you realize, okay, this went wrong. This could have gone better. This wasn't helpful. She was neglected in this way. And then you have a more complete story, and it gives you, empathy for her and her situation, and also hopefully a desire to make things better so that women don't have to suffer this way. I know for me, I just put myself in her shoes, and I can't imagine going through a miscarriage, and on top of that, having that shared with the whole world, and being on trial in that way. I mean, without exaggeration, that's something that you will remember for the rest of your life. That's
Oh,
not,
yeah.
this
Oh,
is
yeah.
not a small thing. I mean, this is something that you carry for the rest of your life. Your family carries the questions and the shame about that. And I don't want to see that happen to another woman. And so what can we do, to make it so that that doesn't happen for other women? And so what can we do even as pro-lifers so that people know that we're not okay with this? I mean, that's, I think, even part of the reason we're having this conversation. So I want to express that I'm not okay with what happened. And I want to work so that, it's already difficult for Black women who are pregnant. We already know that they have higher maternal mortality rates, infant mortality rates, and they already say that they feel like they're not being listened to by their medical providers. And now you just bring in this whole other element of things, and it's already tense. It's already challenging, and now you have this, and I don't want women to be afraid. I don't want Black women who are pregnant to be afraid that if this happens to them, maybe I shouldn't call the hospital. Maybe I shouldn't go in. If I go in, will I be the next face on the television? And so instead, they just say, okay, I'm going to just deal with it at home. And maybe their miscarriage has caused excessive bleeding, and they really need to go in and be seen by somebody. Or maybe, God forbid, a part of the fetus, the fetal remain is left inside of them. Not everything came out from the miscarriage, but they're afraid to call the hospital because they don't want to possibly be investigated. That's very dangerous. And so we can't have that happening. And I worry that it already is, and that we're not aware of it and handling it in the way that we should.
Right. And so my question is, with everything that was gathered, all the evidence that, like, even like surface level evidence that us non-detectives have,
Right.
have
Definitely
gathered,
non-detectives.
all the articles and interviews. Um, and even everything you just said, Christina, how do we argue that she was not arrested because of having a miscarriage I had a miscarriage in 2014. I would have been 9 weeks, but the baby's heartbeat stopped at 5 weeks. Past like having a regular menstrual cycle.
Right.
They did not tell me I needed to come in. They did not need to check me. They just said, this is what will happen. If you experience any of these symptoms, then we want to see you. How do we explain that it wasn't because of the situation? Like, are we holding on? Because how many women would know, Christine,
Right.
beside you, that if the doctor telling me this child is not viable, you're going to miscarry, how many of us would know that we're not supposed to do that and that we're supposed to take it back to the hospital?
Right, exactly. And I think that's a very good point. I don't think we can justify her arrest, because I don't think she should have ever been arrested. I think that it's ridiculous that she was arrested. If you think about it, and this is not the same thing at all, I'm making a comparison, but how many times have you heard stories of people who have literally left their child in the back of the car on a summer day, and the child dies? have you ever even heard, have you seen a trial in that type of a situation where a person is, brought to trial? I haven't. I mean, maybe there are, but I haven't. I don't exactly know what they even do in those situations. I often hear the story of, oh, this is so horrible. The child was left in the car. And then after that, I don't ever hear anything else. I don't think that people in those situations often get jail time. I think it's just, oh, this is a horrible tragedy. I know probably enough for you suffering with the reality of what you did. Again, this is not the same situation, but I think that there's room to understand that when someone's having a miscarriage, they examined the baby after this all happened, and the doctor said, this baby was deceased. This was a deceased child that had passed. There should be room to understand that women are not often told what to do. They don't always know what to do. And it's also important to note that they can't always do things on their own either. Now, of course, yes, anyone can call 911, but it was a complicated situation because she had not told her mother, and she probably didn't want a lot of people to know. I know for me, when I miscarried, my husband was right there. I could not have gone to the hospital on my own. There's no way in God's green earth I could have gotten to the hospital on my own. He had to drive me there. And even that was just horrible. And I will say this too, even going into the hospital, I do think that's the best situation because, again, they can test you, they can make sure there's no fetal remains inside of you, and they can also, I found out that the child was a boy because I went in and then done genetic testing, and so that was beneficial all around. But even still, it's still kind of traumatic because when I went in, I remember the doctor being like, "Oh yeah, it's in there." Like, I mean, it was insane. They were just looking at the remains of the fetus in like a little whatever container, and they were just so casual, as if I was like dropping off my laundry or something. I mean, the way they were talking about it, I'm sitting there like shocked. And so I can see what people are just like, nope, I don't even want anything to do with that. I can understand that. So I don't think we can justify why it happened. I don't think it should have happened. But that being said, that doesn't mean that we're saying it's not important to have laws that protect the abuse of a corpse. This was not the abuse of a corpse, but it is important to have those laws. Now, from what I've read, I've seen multiple articles where they say that those laws are really more intended to protect like bodies, like in graveyards where like some people will try to mess with body. I mean, I don't know who does this, but I guess there's some people who try to
Yeah, like
desecrate,
grave diggers.
grave diggers. And I think those laws are more towards that. But of course, because we're talking about abuse of a corpse, so a body that's passed away. Those laws are important. It's important for human bodies, whether they're dead or alive, to be protected and have dignity. So we're not saying that those laws need to be taken off the books, but I think what we are saying is the court said it, that her situation does not fall in line with that law, that
Right.
those are two separate things. And that's why they dropped the case, because it doesn't fit, and it shouldn't have been that she was brought on charges for that particular law. Not saying do away with the law, but saying this is not that.
Yeah.
And I think that's all that we can do. But again, when you're talking about on social media, it's very difficult because the emotions, it's very there's a lot of emotions that are brought up. There's a lot of pain that's brought up. There's a lot of fear that's brought up. And so it's hard to even discuss facts, because when fear comes in, when emotion comes in, when pain comes in, when race comes in, when racism comes in, when all of those things come together, it's like a storm. And it's very hard to have, clear thoughts about it.
Yeah.
What about Candace? I want to hear Candace's thoughts, because I know I've been talking a lot.
Well, that's good. Yeah, well, first, thank you, Christina, for sharing your perspective. I did have a follow-up question for you.
Sure.
What message would you share with some pro-life individuals who refuse to really address this issue, speak on this issue in a compassionate way?
Well, what I would say to the pro-life community is that we can't afford to ignore the reality that Black women are treated differently by medical professionals at large, that we have a higher maternal mortality rate and higher infant mortality rate, and that many women are very vocal about the fact that they are not listened to by providers. I've worked with women who've also expressed this and had unfortunate circumstances. And even myself, I have also experienced this discrimination at the hands of medical providers. And so we can't ignore that, especially when we are fighting to end abortion and we are very much aware that Black women have the highest abortion rates. And we're comfortable, we being a pro-life movement, we're comfortable talking about that. We're very comfortable saying, you know, Black women have 3 times higher rates of abortion than any other race. Black women are the most targeted by the abortion industry. We're very comfortable saying that, but then we're uncomfortable looking at the other reality that Black women are saying themselves, that they are being mistreated by, you know, medical professionals, or they are not receiving the same level of care that their, you know, white counterparts are receiving. And so I think that we need to be willing to look at that, and then first, if you know, to have an understanding of that, because if you don't have an understanding of that, then it's hard to even look at Brittany's case with compassion and empathy. If you don't understand that Black women are being criminalized, then it's hard to even have empathy, you know, for her, because without realizing it, you're not intentionally doing it, without realizing it, you're casting her in that same light, you know, as a criminal, as someone that did this horrible act, you know, you plunged your baby into the toilet. That doesn't line up with this woman who had been to the hospital multiple times that week, who herself worked as a medical receptionist, that felt alone, most likely. I don't see her just, you know, plunging away this baby into the toilet with a malicious intent to, what would the malicious intent be, really? The baby had passed and she knew it. So I think that we need to gain understanding and wisdom about some of these larger things. And if we don't, we're going to be out of step, because the pro-abortion, pro-Black reproductive rights organizations, trust me, they are talking about this. So, you know, you've got your sister song, you know, primarily, you know, Black pro-abortion organization. And of course, you know, Planned Parenthood, all these different organizations, they are working with her, raising money for her. They are talking about this. And for us, you know, many of us in the pro-life movement, it's not even a discussion. And so I don't know how that's going to work well with us. What it will do is paint a picture for the Black community that Planned Parenthood's on their side and that we don't want to wade into these tricky waters. And that's really scary, because so many Black women already believe that Planned Parenthood's on their side. And so situations like this, when they stand with Brittany, it makes them more of an ally. And when we're silent, I mean, I hope that they wouldn't think we're an enemy, but they definitely wouldn't consider us a friend. They would consider that our silence is probably more important than what's happening to them. And you know, I had to ask myself that question when I was watching this all play out. I'm like, okay, so in situations where it doesn't make the news, and there's not, now it is, you know, these situations are rare. Like even Sherilyn said, being in Ohio, there's not been a case like this before. But in a future situation, if it doesn't make the news, you know, who is going to champion for a woman that's in a situation like this?
Yeah.
I don't know. I really don't know. And I'm also wondering what's happening to Brittany. Like, is she becoming like more focused on, you know, whatever pro-abortion advocates are telling her? You know, is she going to become a voice for, you know, Planned Parenthood or some of these pro-abortion groups that she's working with? Is she going to become a voice for them, because they've really supported her? And I mean, it would make sense based on who she would trust and who she would go to. So that's sad, you know, to me as well. And so I think there's a lot of lessons to learn. A lot of lessons to learn in this situation.
Yeah.
Thank you, Christina, so much for your insight. I think we really do appreciate even just the question that Candace asked and how you answered it. I think it's going to be really pivotal to how we move forward um, in these types of situations. And like I said, I know we needed to put out a statement very quickly, just basically saying that we disagree with her being arrested, we being the Whole Life Project. And so, you know, hopefully there won't be any other cases like this or any other situations, but I am a little bit more skeptical than that. So we just really appreciate your insight and really appreciate how strongly you're able to communicate to both sides just what is justice and what is right when it comes to a situation like this.
Well,
Yes.
I thank you guys and thank you for what you shared about me. And I thank you for giving me the space to talk about it because I have not yet talked about it. I think sometimes social media, I often say I need a longer form of, social media than my Instagram, like 90-second reels, because there's just no way in God's green earth that I can really talk about this in a short form. And of course, I could make a longer video on Instagram. I could make a 10-minute video, but I think people lose interest after it's that long. And so, there's certain platforms like YouTube and other platforms that are just more geared towards having these longer conversations, and obviously a podcast as well. But I haven't talked about it. I've gone to talk about it multiple times, and I've just I am a reader and I am a researcher. And so I'm always wanting to read every comment. And even still, even with me reading so many articles, some of the things that you said, I did not know. And I had gotten different information from different articles. And so I always try to wrap my mind around a situation before I'm able to speak on it. And with this one, I have not publicly said anything yet, but I've been thinking all these things. I've been grieving over it with her. I felt the pain. So I'm grateful to have this opportunity to be able to share those things. And hopefully people will hear our hearts and they'll understand. It's not about, you know, we're not here to just point fingers and say they did it wrong, they did it wrong, they did it wrong. Although there is wrong that was done and it should be called out. And I'm glad that we did that. But our main goal is to say, how do we do this better? Because, how do we, as a nurse, you go to school. I don't believe, I always give people the benefit of the doubt. So I'm not believing that you go to school to be a nurse just so that you can call the police on people one day. I believe that you want to help people. And if you're a mom and you're suffering miscarriage and you've gone to the hospital, I don't believe that you're trying to break some kind of law that you didn't even know about. So giving everyone the benefit of the doubt, what do we do, going forward? And that's where we have to talk about this so that we can better educate people about what to do.
Yeah. And one more question. How can people follow you, Christina?
Well, they can follow me on Instagram, which I just talked about. They can follow me on Instagram. Black Pro Life Woman is my Instagram account. And I'm on TikTok too, Black Pro Life Woman, but I've not yet gotten the courage to turn on comments on TikTok because people on TikTok they just they're gonna come for you. So I'm like, I'm 42. I'm just like trying to put some videos out there, but I'm not ready yet to deal with the comments. So my comments are off, but I do post some stuff. Facebook, Christina Marie Bennett, and then I have a website, ChristinaBennett.com. And so you can find me all of those ways. And I will say, like I mentioned, like Sherilyn mentioned in the beginning, I work for Live Action as a news correspondent, but this is not our opinion as an organization. This is my opinion and my thoughts. And so I think it's important to make that distinction that I'm not always speaking in official capacity as a news correspondent from them, but I am sharing my personal thoughts as a pro-life advocate who's been a pro-life advocate for close to 20 years. And so this is what this is something that really is very important to me. So yeah, so people can find me that way. Technically I'm on X as well too, Black Pro Life Woman, but that's another one that I don't always post a lot on. There's certain platforms you just like better than others,
Sure.
I get it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Christina. We really appreciate having you. It was really exciting to have you on again to
Yes.
talk about the
Very
next
insightful.
hot topic.
Thank you.
Again, I'm Sherilyn Holloway,
And I'm Candace Conaway.
and you are listening to the Whole Life Podcast.